You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Jim Jousma welcoming you to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. Joining me all the way in Portland, Maine, we have Your Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty great. I have had kind of a busy week, it feels like, to be totally honest. But I think something that's been kind of the highlight of my week is I learned that my brother does these model things. Where they'll take a certain model of normally a Hot Wheels or some kind of like die-cast car, and they will have like a theme to it and make it over like almost like a diorama thing. So I've been waiting 2 weeks to see this thing that he's doing. And I thought it was really neat because they were looking for theme recommendations, and they wound up going with a theme recommendation that was put up by my stepdaughter, and she got a little shout out at the beginning of the video that his competitor does. Because I guess the person that he did the head-to-head to has a YouTube channel. Nice. And so he put like some of the very quick fast forward of the build on there. So that was really cool. I got to kind of nerd out about that like while I was getting dressed the other morning, because like they finally had it done, and my brother sent me, little YouTube videos. So that was pretty neat to watch. But we are getting sunnier weather here in Portland, Maine. It's still kind of cool because I'm coastal. But it's felt nice mentally. Right? Because I know I mentioned weeks ago that I started going back and running 10 minutes a day to get out of a funk. So I'm doing great there. I actually wound up in a total fit of everything. I chopped off my hair. I mean, I didn't do it. I came super close, but I didn't want people to feel like they needed to check me in somewhere. I feel bad because I know we've talked a lot about Britney Spears's, she was going through some things when she made that decision, right? But I do feel like Britney shaving off her own hair, really ruined it for those of us that just don't give a shit about our hair. So I went to a barber and it's all gone. So I'm really ready for this summer. I'm ready to really get into my running and get into my physical activity. And then, of course, my stepkids will be here in just a handful of weeks. So just so much going on. What about you? How are things in your neck of the woods?
Oh, man, this week it has been relatively quiet, which is a good thing. I'm also wrapping up my last couple weeks of the semester in school, just working on finishing up a draft for my fiction class at the moment, and also focusing on some of my own writing as well. But yeah, just overall, just kind of a quiet week. And, with my life the way it's been the past couple of years, having a quiet week is not a bad thing at all.
Right. Quiet weeks are a blessing. That's normally when the Mr. Reverend does go out of town, because I have to make pro and con lists to be okay with things in my head. And when he's gone, depression, stuff like that, just one little thing about your week being removed can totally fuck with your chemical balances, right? So one of those pros is, well, but it's quiet, right? It's not that you're lonely. You can choose to view this as chosen solitude. So it's funny that I'm trying to get myself to look forward to it in that sense. And it does work, right? Because it's okay to be happy about having some alone time. I don't need to be that codependent in my relationships. So it's been kind of nice to be able to reframe it that way. So good quiet weeks are a blessing.
Oh, indeed. I mean, I think of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. The first couple of years of their marriage, they literally did not leave each other's sides. The story being John Lennon was, at the start of their marriage, was not exactly in the healthiest of mind when it came to relationships with women, and it did get to the point to where Yoko in the middle of the 70s told him, here's a ticket, go to Los Angeles and stay there for a while. And he ultimately did, and just hung out in Los Angeles for a couple of years, getting drunk a lot. And then he realized he missed Yoko, changed his life around, and then ultimately they found something that ended up working for them, and I think the important thing in any relationship is, you do need those times alone, because, sometimes if you spend too much time with someone, I think of the Chris Rock bit to where, like he has his girlfriend saying something to him and he goes, just why don't you get kidnapped so you have something new to say? Like you need that time away.
Oh my gosh, yes, because it can be excessive. And I mean, for us, it was just, we were fairly independent before the pandemic. But, when you suddenly have like 2 years where for the most of it, you're around each other all the time, because, his school went remote when he was finishing up his degree. And then I stopped and started doing, I stopped going to my office jobs and stuff and was in. So we really adapted to being around each other a lot. Mm-hmm. Right. I don't want to say that it's just as jarring as if your dog is gone suddenly. But right, any sudden absence of something in your space, does feel weird. And it was weird to adjust to being around him all the time. And so it makes sense that I'm having an adjustment period. I needed that for him going away for a week at a time. Yeah. It surprised me though, because I've always been a fairly independent person. I totally soak up NRE at the beginning. Don't get me wrong. I obsess and want to be nothing but around you whenever I first start dating you. But for the most part, I warn that, that will end, and I will very much need to be able to do my own things. So it's been really funny for me to unpack, being okay with having a week alone. When I think before a pandemic, Reverend would have always kind of looked forward to that in a way. As long as I've got my cat, because there was always that factor that, I've got my cat as my ESA, so I wouldn't need to be alone in the evenings. But, she makes it quiet.
Yeah, well, and also can help out too with depression, which is a great segue to our topic for the week.
Yeah, I love when we randomly ramble into our topic.
Yeah, we're total professionals here, folks. It was totally planned.
Gotcha.
But continuing on with our theme with this month, because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, we did want to talk about depression. And it's one of those topics that everybody's aware of, but I think it's also one of those things that we don't necessarily talk about as much because, at least in America, we do have that mindset of, if you're not able to solve your own problems on your own, there must be something wrong with you.
Right. Let's not give you any tools for how to deal with this, even though it's we know it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of how they used to just not, I've met girls who were not taught anything about their menstrual cycle, right? It's they'll figure it out. I'm but you're kidding me, right? It's not, that was never something that anybody figured out. There was either, you had the place where you went and sat away for a week. And nowadays it's you need to know so that you have products, right? So I just, no, that specifically was never anything that was supposed to be figured out. And I do think that it is the socially and even, in a sense, parentally or educationally, however you want to cover it, it is the responsible thing to do to talk about how to deal with something when so many people need to know how to deal with it. So that's the thing that doesn't happen in America. And at least we're kind of talking about that, right? Because we've got educators talking about teaching emotional regulation. Granted, we also have the small amounts of parents with pitchforks and torches saying, "Don't you teach my kids this stuff," which is so bizarre, but whatever. I don't understand the problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's isn't that along the same lines as the parents that, don't teach my kids how to about sex. I will teach that in my own home, and they don't.
Exactly. It goes back, well, you didn't, which is what they found, which is why public school went, maybe we need to address this because it's becoming a public issue, but that's a total digression. Yep. But the thing is there is a lot of conversation around how relevant depression is in our culture in America. So that's what we want to talk about today. I think it's pretty much the top charting mental illness, mental disorder, invisible illness, whatever it is you like to call that. I say none of those things with any stink. So I hope none of those terms are offensive these days, because I pretty much found all of them in my research.
Mhm.
But I know that I don't even know how to talk about mental illness, because sometimes people have a problem calling it a mental illness or having an illness, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely part of the problem too. I mean, it is, you have to treat it like an illness, because if you don't, it gets worse. And it really, I mean, depression is just chemicals in the brain not working correctly. And if something in your body, like if you're getting a cold, that's your body not reacting to a virus that's in your body, and then you got to take the cold medicine in order to get that fix. Why wouldn't you do that with your mental health as well?
Exactly. So we thought we'd start off kind of the top of the show. We wanted to lighten it up this week. We've covered some kind of intense topics, so it's going to be a little bit more. We're going to share some stats of just how relevant it is in our culture. And then Tim and I wanted to talk about tools that we know of that aren't medicating. Because I think a lot of us know, and we've talked about it a lot recently, especially this month, like if you do feel like you need something to help you in that sense of medication, doctors aren't really prescribing it as a forever thing anymore. It's like now being more recommended. Hey, try it and see how you do for X number of months, and we'll check in on it. So there are definitely those revenues. If you do have the ability to go see a physician, as we discussed in our last episode, that is a point of privilege for people. Not everybody is privileged enough to go. Even if they do have health insurance, there's still a lot of fear that will keep people from going to a doctor, like of, hidden costs. They don't really know how much it's going to be. What if they want to run tests? So we wanted to get out of what you can do medically and do a little bit more of a focus on self-healing at the end. So we thought that would be a nice upbeat way to end Mental Health Awareness Month.
Indeed. Now, let's dive into those stats.
All right. So I found an article from hopkinsmedicine.org, which is Johns Hopkins Medical. So the following are the latest statistics available from the National Institute of Mental Health Disorders, and that's part of the National Institute of Health, just as a side note. Mental health disorders account for several of the top causes of disability in established market economies, such as the United States, worldwide, and include major depression, which is also called clinical depression, manic depression, which is also called bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and obsessive compulsive disorder. An estimated 26% of Americans age 18 and older, so that's a little more than 1 in every 4, suffers from a diagnosable mental disorder in a given year. Many people suffer from more than one mental disorder at a given time. In particular, depressive illnesses tend to co-occur with substance abuse and anxiety disorders. Approximately 9.5% of American adults age 18 and over will suffer from a depressive illness, and that's from major depressive to bipolar or dysthymia. If you don't know what that is, fun fact, that was the first thing I got diagnosed with, which is like, it's almost like saying you have light depression. But what was interesting about that is it makes you think it's less dangerous. But even when I was learning about it in psychology classes, I learned, well, in a way, it can be more dangerous because dysthymic patients tend to have more energy. And sometimes what keeps somebody from making a life-ending decision is not having the energy to make the decision. So I basically got told by my doctor, you're actually at a more substantial risk for suicide, which, if you did listen to the episode a few back, you know that was relevant to my life, at least at some point. So anyway, women are nearly twice as likely to suffer from major depression than men. While major depression can develop at any age, the average age at onset is the mid-20s. And the last thing they had is most people who commit suicide have a diagnosable mental disorder, most commonly a depressive disorder or a substance abuse disorder. And so just to put that back into perspective, the number of suicide deaths, according to a mortality data in 2020 through the National Vital Statistics System in the United States, was 45,979 casualties to suicide. Because that's how I like to put it. You're a casualty to suicide. If you're depression, PTSD, or whatever it is that you are obviously struggling with, because at that point I would say you're struggling. If it's worsening towards those thoughts, like that's kind of that end result of that. So yeah, it's pretty,
sad.
Yeah, it's sad. These numbers aren't great. And especially when you consider we seem to have had an eye on this for a long time. Like, I kind of wanted to see, like, how long ago have we kind of started discussing what is a depression epidemic in the United States? And I did actually find an article back from just after Robin Williams committed suicide back in 2014 that had some other interesting stats I wanted to throw in here. So according to worldwide projections from the World Health Organization, this is all, again, the articles from 2014. By 2030, the amount of disability and life lost from depression will surpass that from war, accidents, cancer, stroke, and heart disease. In fact, the WHO reports that for youth aged 10 to 19, depression is already the #1 cause of illness and disability. So it's happening younger. According to a 2012 survey by the Association for University and College Counseling Center Directors, 95% of college counseling center directors in America reported an increase in the number of students with significant psychological problems. The 2012 survey of students by the American College Health Association found that 33% of women and 27% of men identified a period in the previous year of feeling so depressed that they had difficulty functioning. And for those out there that aren't psychological diagnostic nerds and know about the DSM-4 and the DSM-5 and how that works in the psychological field, for it to be a disorder, it does like need to kind of be affecting your life. Like, it needs to be getting in the way of living life. So that's kind of why they phrase it that way. Like, that's saying that technically in those moments, they would have been diagnosed with depression, because if it's keeping you from going to work, functioning, that's when it is a problem that maybe you should have had intervention with, even though you didn't. And then the last one, according to the Centers for Disease Control, antidepressant use has increased 400% since 1988 in America. Now, you do need to take, like, so some of this stuff, as we've talked about studies before, you need to take into consideration access to it would be an influence, affordability, stuff like that. So that's not all necessarily going to be showing how many people struggle with it. This is also showing that access has happened. So you have to take it with a grain of that, right? In fact, 11% of Americans over the age of 12 take an antidepressant, which was the part of that I found most shocking, because 12 just seems so young to be starting this now. And so that also could be influencing that, right? And then, a recent BBC News story reported that so many people are taking Prozac in the United Kingdom that scientists are concerned that active metabolites in human urine are running off into water and affecting the behavior of wildlife. So that being said, it's not just us. I thought it was interesting to throw something in there to be like, this is a thing. And so it's very much like you're not alone. If you are somebody out there that has struggled with, or maybe you find a way to manage on your own, or you suspect that depression is something that comes in and out and affects your life, you're definitely not alone. This is seeming to happen huge in the United States and even in other places. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's sad too, because it sounds like that, if we had the perfect, not even perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect in real life. If we had a good healthcare system in this country, a lot of people would have the ability to get these diagnosable things actually diagnosed and not have to rely upon items to medicate on their own. I think a lot of the reason that, people turn to, like hardcore drugs or even, tobacco and alcohol is that cheaper to get those 9 times out of 10 than it is to go to the doctor and, get, the medicine. I mean, sure, if you're like on Medicare or something like that, there are some prescription things. Like for my medicine, for instance, I don't have to pay anything right now for it. Thank goodness. But, if I had insurance from an employer, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's also going to show the programming of between social media or what's on our TV. Like, how many shows can you probably think of, when you're honest with yourself, that at least one of the characters would go home at night and have a glass of or a can of to relax, to unwind, right? Like, from your day. And I'm not even saying that is necessarily a bad practice. Like, right? Like, realistically, if you're going home and having a beer at the end of the day to help disconnect between work and home so you can have a healthy home life, all power to you. But if it's turning into one of those things where it's a self-medication level, like where you're kind of doing, it was 1 beer, but now it's more like 5, and I'm not even really enjoying my evening. And then I'm looking at it and I'm not actually getting rest. Because then it kind of affects your sleep in that way. And that's where I could see it being a slippery slope of not necessarily being healthy. And of course, what makes that inherently dangerous is doctors don't prescribe a beer at night. So you're not having that conversation with the medical professional that you could have if you were on something like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or maybe something that's more for instantaneous anxiety, like the kind of I can't think of the name of it right now. Citalopram, is that right? I'll look it up here in a second while you talk, because I know that there is like I used to be on it, but it was more not a buildup one like that got effective the more you took it. It was more for anxiety in the moment.
I mean, a lot of these statistics are just sad because a lot of this is just easily preventable. But like you mentioned at the outset, I mean, one thing we did want to do is talk about some things you can do at home that don't necessarily revolve around going to the doctor. Because when it comes to depression, there are things that the average person can do, no matter your age, no matter your sex or anything like that, which can, help brighten your day somewhat. Even if you're in the throes of the deepest depression, doing some of these things may help you out.
Exactly. So whether it's the case that you don't have access to medical help or you just don't really want to take that route, we wanted to put it out there, some things that we personally have tried. And of course, you guys know I've nerded out and found probably too many articles that no one will ever read, but at least I can talk about what was in them.
You should be reading them, folks. If you are enjoying this show the Reverend some appreciation by reading the articles. You can find them in the show summary.
It's okay. It really is. It's if you're interested. I'm not here to bullshit anybody and try to lie to you. Even when I make posts, which we'll get into that because there was a post I'd made a long time ago and actually one recently too, I try to quote my references because we have a huge problem with our social media, with people kind of make a meme and then it looks very factual. And because that's basically how gaslighting works, it puts stuff out there that might not necessarily be based in anything. So really, I share the articles as a sense of being as honest as I can with you guys so that you know where I'm coming from and getting my information, that it's not just shit that I'm making up and make sound really, really good. This is stuff that really has been vetted. So follow along with us. I think we're going to impart some really cool stuff out here today.
And I think most importantly, too, like you mentioned this to me in a text message thread a couple of days ago. We actually have people that are responding to what we are saying. Like you said, you had a high school friend who's listening to the show here. And I think the reason I bring that up again is I think, we're not bullshitting you people. We're not. If we are talking about a topic, we're going to do our best to show you where we got our information. And if we did get something wrong, also correct that. That's, I think one thing people that do have a platform can do to fight against some of this nonsense that we are seeing today. And that's just being honest. So here we are being honest.
Yeah. But let's go ahead. Let's get on. We're done teasing, I think. Let's go for the self-healing benefits you can start tapping into as early as today if you wanted to.
Indeed. Like one thing that I know has helped me out over the years are animals. And I came across an article on WebMD called How Pets Can Help Manage Depression. And they had some bullet points here that we will go through and just kind of talk here. Like the first bullet point. Seems pretty simple and straightforward, but animals can bring you comfort, companionship, and love. When you're depressed, a pet can pick up on your feelings and try and comfort you. You mentioned before we started, Beans.
Yes, who is not here right now, so I must be feeling great. No, Beans, actually, she is my ESA. She has a letter for my diagnosis and all of that. She's medicine for me, according to, I guess, the registry and my apartment, because that's why I'm allowed to have her. Well, I mean, I guess I could have had her. I just didn't want to pay pet rent because that to me is ridiculous. But she is very much in tune with me. I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers at the bagel shop today. And they were like, wait, you can train a cat to do that? I was like, well, it's not really so much that she's trained. She just loves me. And so she knows when I'm not feeling well. the best thing to do is I need to lay down. She needs to get me to lay down. So she'll get under my feet quite obsessively until I lay down. And it's just something that I noticed she was doing. I didn't train her to do that. I just went, oh, okay, that's fair. You're probably right. And then what's great is I was actually listening to one of our older episodes from a while back ago where I talked about her doing that right after I had dislocated my hip. And I was getting really frustrated. Like, it's not that kind of uncomfortable. Like, let me walk or I'm going to trip on you. But to which you actually pointed out she was probably still right. And I should have been like resting. But yeah, they are in tune with you, especially if you're treating them like part of your tribe or your pack, or in a cat's case, a pride. Like, animals have their places. Like they are also like pack animals.
That, and they, as we've discussed many times on the show before, they have emotions as well. I mean, if your pet loves you, they love you. It is not out of some selfish thing that, just because you bring them food or clean their litter box or whatever. It is not completely selfish like that. They recognize the work you put into keeping them alive and safe. And they love that. And they want to show their appreciation too. Like Phil always loved to just have me pick him up to get on the bed. He wasn't strong enough to hop up on himself. But, when I was sad and just couldn't get out of bed, he would want to be on the bed and then just lie his head on my shoulder and just lay there. And just the purring was, I mean, I forgot where it was meant. I don't think it was in the articles I read here, but I think you mentioned it before too, like how purring is clinically proven to, be medically helpful to human beings. Just having depression. A cat on you. Yeah.
Yep. It can actually like release endorphins in your brain, like similar, like, and so it can reduce depression, anxiety fits. And to anybody who says that animals don't care, and it's not even about the one that feeds them. Look at how many videos they are. There's the cat that like busted after that fucking dog that like attacked the toddler. That toddler never fed that fucking cat, but that cat knew that toddler was part of its pride and it took care of it. There's also endless videos of like dogs like grabbing a child's clothes to keep them from going down the stairs that the nanny cam caught. Like, animals are intuitive and they know when they are in a pack or a pride. So as long as you're treating your pet or ESA like they are in a pack or pride, I guarantee you they are going to pick up a lot of that thing. And that is kind of the difference between the ESA and a therapy, like an actual trained therapy animal, right? Like totally making sure I've separated those.
That reminds me of, I've been really digging TikTok lately, and there's this one channel that I follow of this guy who does voiceovers for animals. And there was one video that he did a voiceover on for a cat interacting with a toddler. And the toddler, they were at like an apartment building that had a balcony, and the kid was trying to climb up on the railing of the balcony, and the cat, was essentially keeping the kid safe by, swatting the kid's hand to get it off of there. But it was funny because the guy doing the voiceover was like, "Rhonda, are you gonna come get your kid or what? Jeez, you can't get on here, kid." I thought it was funny.
But you can actually legit Google "cat saves boy from dog," and that is the exact video that I'm talking about. Super cat saves boy from dog attack in California. But like there's a lot of stories like that. So animals they're great. They do get to know you.
Indeed. Another benefit of having a pet is that they give you a regular schedule. When you're depressed, like I mentioned last week when I was in the midst of my severe depression in 2019, I didn't really get out of bed much. But having a cat, I had to get out of bed to make sure his litter box was cleaned up and, he had fresh food. So again, when I mentioned how my cat in 2019 helped save my life, that was one of it. That was one reason, because again, I had something to do. And then over time, once I met Sherman, had more activities. I mean, with a pet, you are going to be busy depending on the type of pet. Now, there are some like cats that are hands off in a lot of ways. You have dogs, which you have to be a little more involved in their life, but you are going to be more active.
Exactly. And it also gives you that sense of responsibility that can sometimes keep you from being that person that either literally stays in bed all day or makes a life-ending decision, because I'm not going to ignore the fact that depression seems very prevalent in that decision. So that is going to be brought up probably a few times through this, I think, but not to the point where I think we need any sort of trigger level or trigger warning. But yeah, like it gives you that sense of responsibility. That's something, Tim, you even mentioned in the episode where we did talk about that, was Phil was a piece of that for you.
That he was. And, that having that responsibility to, care for him was a way for me to care for myself too. Because again, like I mentioned, if I didn't have him and it was just me all alone stewing in that apartment, who knows what would have happened, but having that responsibility was definitely important, and it also kind of goes into the next one here. They can give you a sense of calm. In the article, there was a great quote here, and it also it mentions a couple things I know you talk about often. Touch helps increase oxytocin levels and reduces cortisol, the infamous stress-related hormone. So taking time out of your day to, pet your animal for even 5 or 10 minutes or something like that is going to be releasing the right types of chemicals in your brain.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to hugging, right? But unfortunately, like you have less control over hugging if you don't have a lot of people in your life, or particularly around the pandemic, especially if you are somebody that still needs to be extra careful because of people in your life or any underlying conditions that, whatever. Animals can be a great way to do that. But I'd imagine it would be kind of a lot of the similar effects that's out there with, hugging, because there's a lot of like what hugging does, like hugging another human does. So any of that contact is good though.
Oh yeah. I mean, whether it's a fleeting moment where you just get a couple of pets, or if you're on the couch and your cat hops or dog hops in your lap, or if you're babysitting some chickens and they're slicing up your arm to try and eat your arm hair, it's spending that time with them, you're going to definitely have some benefits. And another benefit too, physical activity. People with pets are going to be a lot more active. I mean, even if you have just a gerbil, I mean, if you're cleaning out your gerbil's cage once a week, that's still activity that you weren't doing before.
Oh, exactly. And it's like, I've already planned that when Beans does cross the Rainbow Bridge, my next ESA is going to be a dog. And a large part of that is I want a running buddy. Because I know that was something I really struggled with Jared being out of town. Speaking of adapting to somebody being gone, was I had a hard time getting back into my physical activity when he was gone. So, and that would give me, again, that sense of responsibility too, because there are breeds of dogs who need to run more. And that even goes into picking the right pet for you, like depending on what you want, right? Because when I went with Beans, I was a home buddy. And the concern was I didn't want to be alone, like at night. I need that contact. And what's great is for a long, long time, Beans sleeps on my feet. Now that she's getting older, she's starting to more sleep like under the bed. So because she doesn't want to get tossed around and kicked around anymore, I guess. And what's great is even I had an ex-fiance back in the day, that's something that he had brought up. Because we tried to like go to therapy like after, like to see if we could work things out and stay together. And he had brought up that he missed that apparently what I would do in my sleep is move my foot and find him and put my foot on him. And I still do that. I do that to the Mr. Reverend. I have confirmed that this is something that I do. So for me, having like that other contact, like, because I do still struggle with sleep disturbance as part of my PTSD. So that's something that I wanted very specifically. So even with a dog, it's going to need to be a dog that can sleep in the bed with me. Sorry, I'm not crate training. I need something on my feet when I'm sleeping, I guess. Like that helps me somehow.
And that is a great segue too, because the article did say, when you do choose an animal, if you're choosing it for depression-related purposes, that you want to pick the right pet. Like myself, I absolutely love dogs. I know I don't have the temperament to raise them, and I also don't have the living, space to take care of most dogs that I would like. I don't like the really, really smaller ones because they can be bitches. I had a Chihuahua once, and that thing loved to bite. It loved you, but it was also just loved to bite. So, but you want to pick the right one, and that means, making an honest assessment of what you can handle. Like it is not hard to, speak to a doctor or a therapist and to get the paperwork that you have to be able to have an animal in your home, because most places that you rent today will require like a pet deposit of some sort. But legally, if you have the animal there for a medical reason, they can't do that. So it is usually pretty easy to do that, but it is imperative that you get that right pet for your sensibilities, and take some time to do that research too, because again, once you adopt that pet, it's possible, of course, to bring it back to the Humane Society, and that would be the right thing to do if you can't handle that. But think of what that does to the animal too. I mean, the animal thinks they're free, they're going to get a home, they're going to get a family, and then they got to go back.
Exactly. And you can do some due diligence and research temperament of different breeds. And what I like is a lot of places have gotten better at having interviews and actually not allowing, like, for example, Shelties are really popular, but they're very high energy dogs. Like, that's the dog that if you live in an apartment, you need to be a runner. So see, that would work great for me, but Tim, how often do you go on a jog? Like, and it's just not even being mean. It's just being realistic. Like, and you can be an active person and not a runner, I guess is what I wanted to more put there. Like, you can be more of a walk person, but that's not going to be enough for a high energy ass Sheltie. That Sheltie is going to probably end up acting out, tearing up shit in your house, peeing and shitting on things. Like, they do act out when they don't get what they need. That's like, if you ever watch Jackson Galaxy, I love him, my cat from hell. I would run away with Jackson Galaxy like in a heartbeat. I think he's just a total teddy bear. But he doesn't believe there are bad cats, and normally what he finds is they're not getting some kind of need. Like, people will get these Bengal cats or whatever. They're like basically a jungle cat that's been domesticated, be in a tiny shit apartment with no climbing stuff, no nothing. And they want to know why the cat is like attacking their feet from under the couch. And it comes down to that they're bored, right? Like, they've got all of this energy. They're supposed to be tree climbers. So yeah, like, those are things that you totally should factor, like, not just for the sake of the animal, but for you. I mean, it would suck to get attached to an animal and then realize, well, shit, I can't keep this, right? And especially if you are dealing with depression, it just seems like you might want to take just a step and set yourself as well as the animal up for success in situations.
Indeed. I mean, again, places like the Humane Society understand that situations don't always work, and they will gladly take that animal back, and that is the right thing to do. But it affects them emotionally too. It does. Even though they can't say this affects me emotionally. I mean, especially with like a dog. Dogs hate the shelter anyway because of the loud noises, the smells. It's cats can comfort themselves to a point, but you gotta respect them. You do.
They're pack animals. Half the time when they're in the shelter, they're in cages and separated. So that goes against that nature, and that's why it can be kind of dangerous the longer that they're in there. But I do love Jackson Galaxy is actually one that's tried to help spread awareness and has been working with some shelters to give them a makeover. So cats have more of a, you go into the cat room, and the cats are in there being socialized, happy pack animals, and not these sad creatures that are only being taken out to play like for maybe 10 minutes at a time, depending on what volunteer availability there is. So yeah, I do think that there's like a better direction moving, but you can always do a little due diligence for your sake and the animal's sake and the Humane Society's sake, because that does cost them money too, before you make decisions like that.
Yeah, and that is another thing to keep in mind, too. I'll lump the last two here about interacting often and get up and go. There are plenty of ways to still interact with animals, even if there is an absolute impossibility of you having an animal in your home, because the Humane Society always welcomes volunteers. You have to know somebody that has an animal in your life that wouldn't mind you coming over and playing with the thing for 20 minutes or so. Also, too, we got plenty of animals in nature in the city. Feed a bird, get a bird feeder, squirrels.
Go for a walk and just ask, like, hey, can I meet your dog? like, I wouldn't recommend just petting somebody's dog because some of them are actually training them, like, because there are people who actually train therapy dogs too. So you should always ask permission, but there's that. I actually thought it was really funny. I just watched Ricky Gervais's new special, Superhuman. No, maybe that was, I don't remember. I'm shit with names anyway, but his newest one that's on Netflix. And he actually talks about how his lifestyle is more suit for cats. Like, so they have cats. They love dogs, but they won't get a dog because they know it doesn't suit their lifestyle choices. But what do? They go for walks. They go for walks at the local park. And he's like, I know like 200 dogs by name. I don't know the human's name, but I have 200 dog friends. And yeah, like and it's like, and they become your buddies, because if they become regulars to the park, they're happy to see you. You're happy to see them. So I just thought that was kind of a cool, I had heard somebody talking about like responsible pet choice and like how to also have your cake and eat it too. Just because you can't have an animal right now, like a dog, like say if you really want a dog, but you really can't have one because of your current lifestyle. I'll just make up a pretend person. Say this pretend person is severely overweight and living in a small apartment. It's like, well, I can't have a dog, but you know what? I can start walking. And then, hey, you know what? Maybe you lose weight. And then you learn that you like walking a lot. And then you can have a dog, right? You could still have a small apartment and have a dog, but you do need to kind of be honest with yourself. So it's great because if you go out and walk, and if that's one of your limiting factors to having a dog, maybe you can have your cake and eat it too in that sense too, of making a bunch of local dog friends. And you've tricked yourself into going for a healthy activity that then gets you to a point where you can have a dog.
Yeah, or there are even side gigs now. I've become aware of companies that will.
There's if you're looking for a gig, there's two I know of off the bat called Rover and Wag, and you can be from a pet sitter, where you're bringing them into your home, or you're going and sitting at somebody's house, depending on what service they want or you're asking for or you're willing to offer. And then you can also be a dog walker. It's super cool. You most of them have like a little key thing. You can help yourself in. You go and say hi to doggo, take them on a walk. So you have done somebody a favor. You've also made a little bit of pocket money, and then you've also gotten to have an interaction with a furry friend. So I thought it was cool. You were talking about like services. I was like, oh yeah, there's actually super gig work, like where it's not even you have to do certain hours.
Yep. It's just like you have a person that says, I'm going to be out of town from this date to this date. Please feed my cat. And yeah, you just show up at the house, clean a litter box, feed them, and then that's all you have to do. And again, that's another way, if you are, not only looking to interact with animals, but get a little extra cash on the side. There are a lot of people that's part of my house sitting gig, is taking care of the animals. If the animals weren't there, I don't think the owner would care about the house, having somebody in there as much, Yeah.
And now I will give a heads up. I know for WAG, back when I applied and did it, you had to pay a $25 for a background check on yourself, which made sense. Like, I get why. It's really me putting my contract ability to work on a website. Like, I get where they wouldn't pay for my background check. And then there's also care.com, and that even extends to people. Like, you could honestly help take care of an elderly person, which can be nice because sometimes they just want somebody to talk to, like for a few minutes while you come in and check on them. And then there's also childcare there too, but they do have a lot of animal care opportunities through care.com. So all sorts of stuff. You might need to be prepared to pay about $25 for a background check, because if you're honest, if you were going to use an app to hire somebody to come into your house, you'd probably want to run a background check on them too. So you're just doing that for everybody in one shot.
Yeah. And and if you have robbed quite a few banks, maybe don't expect to get that job. I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, you might have to stick with dog walks in the park, like just running into the dog.
Carry dog treats in your pocket. I don't know. But another thing that can help out with depression that doesn't involve medicine that can help out is music.
This is the big one for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, this is another article from WebMD. The title is How Music Can Help Reduce Stress and Ease Anxiety and Depression. Some of the benefits, studies have shown that listening to relaxing classical music at night can help make sleeping more restful, which I wish I had known that last night. Maybe I wouldn't have put on some Motorhead to go to bed to, but that's a different story.
But yeah, I don't listen to music anymore at night, but which is funny. I more listen to Ancient Aliens, which is just a whole other side hilarious digression of how I keep ending up on that fucking show. But I do listen to chill lo-fi music when I'm driving now, and I've noticed I experience less anxiety when I drive now. So, I mean, not just for sleep, but in other activities, you could totally keep in mind what you need to do. If you get anxious at work and you need to chill, but you also kind of need to focus, there's a lot of really promising studies behind game music nowadays, because a lot of games have very intricate puzzles, and they're being designed, the music being played in the background of these puzzles are actually being designed to help you maintain focus. So you can take from the video games and use that to help you, especially if being distracted. ADHD is also commonly associated with people with depression. It's one of those coexisting ones that's common. So you can totally use music to hack your brain in so many ways, and depression is just one of them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it can lift your mood. It can help reduce stress. It can decrease your blood pressure, lower your cortisol levels, and reduce your heart rate. Recently, for my nonfiction class in school, I had to write a little piece. The idea behind it was you had to talk about the noises in the room, including music. And what I did when I wrote the piece, I would include like a lyric from a particular song I was listening to, and then, write about, just whatever was going through my head. And then what I noticed, I did about 4 different songs, and they were each a different type of mood. And the ones that were darker definitely were affecting my mood. And I didn't even realize it. Like there was I think it was a Black Sabbath song that I was listening to and included the lyric on that. And then started talking about, just stuff I was like upset about, but then ended up putting a lyric from Daydream Believer on. And then all of a sudden everything is, nice and shiny and roses. Music can definitely affect your mood. So it is important to recognize when you are in a particular mood and maybe not listening to certain types of music. Like I've talked about Nirvana before. I love their music, but I also know that if I'm in a spot where I'm a little on the depressed side, maybe listening to, Kurt Cobain sing songs about how his depression was affecting him is not the best.
Right. And that even goes to, there's a post that I had made on my own social media on There's Life After Trauma, where I made a little shareable that just talks about a general piece of advice that I give to people who are struggling with depression or anxiety or any of their invisible illnesses in those realms, is that you may want to look at what music you're listening to. A lot of people think it's weird that I won't listen to mainstream music. It's something we talked about back when we used to do the music reviews a little bit, was that I was so out. I had no idea who was coming out with what, because I don't listen to it anymore. And a big part of that was stumbling across a study that was actually done back in 1994 called The Effective Impact of Music versus Lyrics. And it was by Vian Stratton and Annette Zalowansky. I'm probably way messing that up, but I tried. And basically, I just wanted to give a rundown of the experiments because I even did that on the post that I made back then. But in experiment number 1, the lyrics, music, or lyrics plus music of a sad song were presented to college students. While the music alone increased positive effect and decreased depression, the lyrics plus the music had the opposite effect. In experiment number 2, the sad lyrics plus music was also, the sad lyrics plus music also increased depression and decreased positive effect even when performed in an upbeat style. So they removed and took those same sad lyrics and put them to something upbeat was what that was. And it was still depressing. And then the third experiment showed that pairing the melody with the sad lyrics led subjects to rate the melody alone as less pleasant 1 week later. Lyrics thus appear to have a greater power to direct mood change than music alone can imbue a particular melody with effective qualities. So yeah, they took the song with the sad words, played it, waited a week, played just the music, and even though experiment 1 showed that just the music alone had an antidepressive effect, because a part of their brain still picked it up with the sad lyrics from weeks ago, it still gave depressive effects. So yes, unfortunately, if you really like angry music and you can't figure out why you're angry all the time, unfortunately, that really might be playing into it. So if that's something that you do, that shadow work, that integration, that reflective moment, and you would like to not be that aggressive anymore, you really may need to look at what you're listening to on a day-to-day. And hey, if you want to do another brain hack, I remembered this one and found it really quick. Forbes had an article up that caught a lot of people's eye. The world's most relaxing song. It's shown to, let's see, it's called Weightless. It's induces a 65% reduction in anxiety and a 35% reduction in usual physiological resting rates. So I thought that was really cool. I actually still have that song saved on my Spotify because when I heard that there's a song that they did like a little group research on and that it reduced anxiety and depression in the moment, I'm like, yeah, that's being saved on my phone forever. That's going with me everywhere. And it really did help in a lot of situations. There was some really stressful shit going on. And I played Weightless and it significantly improved my mood. And that is Weightless by Marconi Union, MARCONIUNION. So if you're looking for something to add to your arsenal, that is one that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to keep in mind here, too, is that what we are not saying is that you shouldn't ever listen to music with angry lyrics or intense lyrics. It's being mindful of your own mental health. It's recognizing that certain things at certain times may not go together as well. You know, like if you're not depressed and you want to listen to some angry music and that helps you get through the yard work or dishes, great. But if you're depressed, you're in bed, you're smoking a little extra weed than you should, and then you listen to that, it's pouring gasoline on the fire.
Right. And if you are somebody that's been diagnosed with something like depression, anxiety, PTSD, you may want to be more careful what you're passively listening to. Like, I think I'd even made the joke right before we started recording. I was like, no, if I know I need to cry and I want to cry, I will listen to I have a rule, two max sad songs that I'm allowed to just cry as hard as I want. After that, I need to pull out of it. Because that can be very good for you sometimes. But yeah, it's the staying in it and the swimming in it that's not so great. So, I mean, I've got what I call my life soundtrack, and it is just all music that I know the words to it. I know they are positive messages or just not negative messages, right? Like, I don't necessarily like music. Oh gosh, like there's so much pop music that's just all about fawning all over people and just being just in love and almost like super crazy codependent. I don't like listening to that because I just don't like how it starts making me feel needy. Like I've actually noticed that I am needier when I listen to that stuff. So, you know, it's all about like really, I think shadow work is super important, especially if you are somebody that wants to get to a management level of your invisible illness.
And most importantly, and I think this will be a great segue here, it shows the importance of knowing what you put into your body, whether it be food, drink, music, ideas, whatever, because too much of anything is a bad thing, even if that thing is good.
Yeah, I was super stoked. I know I've mentioned it on the show that I kind of take this wellness approach for my cortisol management, right? That's what I've called it before. My working out and my eating a vegan diet has all fallen under what I call cortisol management. And gosh, I think it was just this last week that I ran across a podcast. I love listening to Maine Public Radio because at certain times they just pull different independent podcasts. And so you get kind of neat stuff on there. I stumbled across something called On Being. They had a guest on there named Kimberly Wilson talking about whole body mental health. And what is it? I wanted to define it from words that aren't mine just to see how close it was to what I feel I do in practice. Whole body mental health is a comprehensive approach to caring for our mental health. It integrates evidence-based nutrition, lifestyle, and psychological factors all together. It's all about putting the mind back in the body. So yeah, I was super stoked to hear people talking about this. As a little side nerd, Kimberly Wilson was actually one of my favorite competitors on one of the early seasons of Great British Bake Off. I had no idea she was a nutritionalist and a psychologist, but she was on Being to talk about this whole body mental health concept. Super excited. If you're interested in this at all, she has a book coming out in mid-July. I was super bummed that it's mid-July because that is exactly after all of my flying is over with. I kid you not. It comes out 2 days after I return from taking the kids back, for the second part of summer. So I was so bummed. I was hoping I was going to get an audiobook to help that flight go. But it is called How to Build a Healthy Brain. And there was a quote from the podcast that I did make a facts-only shareable. I decided I'm going to read it because it's just really stuck with me, this one little kind of monologue she went on for just a second. One of the big issues at the moment, one of the very, very big concerns in terms of things like rates of depression. So depression rates are going up and up and up, and prescription rates are going up and up and up. But recovery rates aren't great. Most people who will have a diagnosis of depression, 50% will continue to have symptoms. And in some assessments, 30% of people with a diagnosis of depression have what's termed treatment-resistant depression. So even though we've had these apparently effective medications and treatments, people aren't getting better. So we've had to kind of reassess our understanding of the causes of depression. And this brings us back to the dualism, because we certainly think that for some people, their depression is largely driven by immune activation or inflammation. It's this contribution of the body. It's not just about the way you think or about unprocessed trauma. I'm a psychologist. These things are important, but we have to bring the body into the conversation, because for some people, the major contributing factor of their depression isn't simply going to be their experiences. It's going to be about the underlying biological processes that are driving this difficulty for them. And that means we have to include the body in our understanding of what's happening in psychology and psychiatry. And that was pretty much the point in the podcast that I just paused and went, I'm buying this book. It sounds so much like the stuff that I've been testing out on my own body over the years. So basically what I consider part of my cortisol management, the biggest parts, has to do with what I put into my body and what outputs of my body. So, right, like diet and exercise. So I did want to share some stuff that kind of seems to really back that we need to care what we're doing with our bodies. And we definitely need to find some way to push cortisol out in the sense of doing some kind of activity. It goes to show only 10 minutes, little teaser before I get to that. It's only 10 minutes of it. But first I'm going to go into what you put into your body matters. I found this really nice article from Food and Mood Center. Little bonus thing. I love that they have a link to the study in these two articles that I kind of found covering the diet part, right? Because I feel like people get really defensive about it. They don't necessarily want to change it, but it seems like it's such a thing that we really need to focus on, especially for anybody out there struggling and wanting to look for ways to manage. But this article from Food and Mood Center did a great job summarizing the study that it does link to. It explains who participated in the trial, how the study worked, as well as intervention and control methods. So I definitely encourage checking out this article, especially if you are interested in the information but don't want to go read the dry study. They did a really good job of it. But what I wanted to focus on was the part where they said, what did we find? The results of the study, published in the International Journal BMC Medicine, showed that participants in the dietary intervention group had a much greater reduction in their depressive symptoms over the 3-month period compared to those in the social support group. At the end of the trial, a third of those in the dietary support group met criteria for remission of major depression, compared to just 8% of those in the social support group. These results were not explained by changes in physical activity or body weight, but were closely related to the extent of dietary change. In other words, those who improved their diet the most experienced the greatest benefit to their depression. And that's what I think. And it's talking about, I think it's the SMILES study, if I'm remembering correctly. But like I said, we'll definitely include this article so you guys can go and read that. But it's the thing that when I talk to people about what I do, for my mental health and I talk about like there's reasons that I chose veganism and all of that, it's met with the most resistance. But what stinks is there's a lot of science that seems to show that this is the best thing you can try to start doing for your body, for your depression, for your invisible illnesses.
Yeah, it would be nice, though, if the government did more to help the citizens on the lower end of the economic stream, though. You actually mentioned to me in the text about watching Adam Conover's new show on Netflix, The G Word. One of those episodes was about food and how he talked about how the government, will give subsidy after subsidy for farmers to grow stuff like wheat and corn. Yet the other vegetables, not so much. And, we have so much corn being produced that they're, turning it into stuff like high fructose corn syrup and just all kinds of other things that really aren't good for you. When if they had just, kind of moved some of those subsidies to, hey, maybe start growing some cucumbers too, or grow some lettuce or something like that, then we wouldn't have stuff like maybe food deserts or, or having the poorest people only able to afford the most bad food out there just because it happens to be the cheapest.
Right. It's like, can we maybe drive down the price of lettuce instead of trying to put cheese and everything? And what's funny is Kimberly Wilson does go into that about how like kids definitely through those growing ages need like certain amino acids, and it's consistently showing that kids aren't getting them. So that's what I'm so excited about that book, because I think she is going to go into some of those bigger systems because she seems very passionate about it. And if you guys did want to listen to that interview, it's really long because it's the uncut one, but it is on Being. They have a whole list of those. Another thing I wanted to bring up as far as like when considering what you're putting into your body, it's a theory that I have been kind of playing with and talking to some people about, and I found that there might be an early study that shows it. I found a worth.com article, Stress is Edible, was what it was talking about. But yeah, one of my favorite theories that I personally believe at this point, that really contributes to the depression epidemic is that we eat so much factory meat that we're essentially eating cortisol and throwing off balances in the body. And this study and some early ones seem to kind of show that there may be something to that, right? Like we know that when we eat an animal that's injected with hormones and things, that we are eating those things, right? So that does kind of make sense. But so if an animal is like undergoing a lot of stress, it is going to have higher cortisol levels. So I wondered, if you're eating that cortisol, is it throwing things off? So the article in Worth talks about a recent study of piglets published in the Journal of Animal Science by Purdue University. Elizabeth Petrosis found that when piglets are fed stress hormones such as cortisol or norepinephrine, their blood levels of these hormones spike, body temperatures rise, and gut biome shift. This poses some questions. How much cortisol or I'm not going to try to say that again. I nailed it the first time. But how much of it is lurking in our meats, and are these levels rising due to the stress put on the animals by our food system? And when we eat foods high in cortisol, do our cortisol levels also spike? Since we know that long-term use of prednisone, a medicinal form of cortisol, is associated with higher rates of high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and obesity, could these stress hormones in our foods be a mechanistic link between modern diets and the growing epidemic of diabetes, hypertension, and obesity? And by the way, in that same study, they found that due to negative feedback loops, like how our body kind of works, the pigs eventually exhibited abnormally low levels of cortisol and norepinephrine due to overcorrection by the body. I'm going to learn words, guys. Like, sorry if that's painful for anybody. I do try. And then just one last little tidbit I wanted to throw out there is I did find an Atlantic article that kind of started talking about this too. The Journal of Animal Science and researchers at the University of Milan's Faculty of Veterinary Medicine recently confirmed that fear experienced during slaughter significantly elevates meat's levels of stress hormone, adrenaline, cortisol, and other steroids. So if they end up connecting these dots, that those naturally, quotes, naturally occurring stress, cortisol, adrenaline, and steroids are like able to be ingested in that meat. And if the standard American diet is now putting meat in every meal, you can kind of see how that could be affecting this depression epidemic that we're having, right? Like that does kind of make sense. You're basically eating antidepressants. If this turns out to be true, I gotta still say if, because right, people aren't pigs, but we have found a lot of studies where we started with pigs did tend to be found to be true in humans too. So it is a place to start. I would be super interested if they do any human trials on this though.
Yeah. And if anything, it makes sense. I mean, because we've talked. I think even last week we talked about it. You know, with like when I talked about the chickens briefly, that when you do have chickens that are shot so full of hormones that they can't even stand on their own feet and they're all cooped together like thousands in one small confined space. Yeah, they're going to be nervous. They're going to be scared. They're going to have tons of chemicals flowing in their body that don't make it taste as good. And also, too, I would like to know like what really was meat intake back in like the 1800s. Like, did we usually not have as much meat and focus more on the vegetables just because they were easier to grow?
Yeah, basically go and Google how the paleo diet has been busted. That's been busted time and time again. Paleolithic man very likely did not eat meat constantly because it goes back into how we hunted was basically to run an animal out because we can sweat, they can't. So we run them to exhaustion and we get them. But at the same time, like, yeah, we're not built as predators. There's a lot about our body that kind of leans towards maybe not all the time. Definitely less though, right? Like maybe we should be eating less, like not just because of the potential of eating the cortisol and stuff, but we're also definitely showing that meat and more meat at every meal is causing physical problems. There just might also be a mental health argument to this too to now consider. Like it already seemed to be like it's becoming a better idea to eat less meat. I feel like that's more prevalent in the discussion now than it definitely used to be when I first went vegan, like back in 03, 04, where people were like, where do you get your protein? And I'm like, where do you get your fiber? You know, you guys are like taking all these fiber supplements. At least I don't have to do that. I can poop fine. So and, I had to leave it ladylike. And now I'll go into exercise like that wasn't fucking awkward. So the last little bit here, I think I've gone on enough about food, guys. But literally, you can do research on your own. There's so much information out there. And it doesn't need to be a plant-based diet, right? But I think there's enough out there that says, like, maybe we can get away from the factory food and see if you can find like a local deli that's kosher. And I know that is more expensive, so I totally understand if that's not available for everybody. This is why I don't eat meat. Like, this is why I quit buying it. And sure, I have factory processed meat when I do go to the store. Hey, the Mr. Reverend and I are going and having hot wings tonight. I don't think those chickens are being hand raised with the love and care like Tim's delicious chickens that he is babysitting. But you know what I mean? But that's my occasional intake. I don't buy it in my home anymore. That is my way of limiting that factory meat. Because, yeah, if I were putting it on the plate every night, it would be every night. But going out every once in a while, sure, I'm going to have hot wings. I don't need to go out and buy expensive vegan food because all they did was make the food that I make healthily at home kind of unhealthy. And I don't need that all the time either.
In a lot of ways, it sounds like it's the same idea a lot of people have with alcohol, too. I mean, you don't need to keep alcohol in the house to still enjoy it occasionally.
Exactly. And especially those people that have learned that about themselves, right? Because I think that's a totally reasonable thing. If you can't just have the one, maybe two tops to unwind after your day and you find that you need a whole six-pack, maybe you should have one at the bar. I'm not encouraging drunk driving. If you get drunk after one, please don't do that. But most people at that point aren't if you're having six at home. So I do kind of understand going to the bar, having that, coming home. It just makes it limiting. And then you can, save money by not buying meat. I like beans. What can I say? I've really gotten used to eating a lot of beans in my life. Lots of different ways. It sounds boring until you realize, like, I don't know, you can grill chicken, but then how many other ways can you cook chicken? Kind of the same with beans. Like, you can make them in a lot of different ways. And they're delicious. Like, really, I do get a lot of interesting, weird flack about my diet. So it's just like, I don't know. I don't think it's hard. And I think it's pretty damn tasty. Like, I make decent food, and it's easy recipes.
Well, at least you're not like my dad. And when he was in his 20s and 30s, I don't know if he still is now because I haven't talked to him in years, but he tried to be a vegetarian. And like his big thing was eating a lot of lentils.
Ooh, I love lentils. Lentil sloppy joes. Sorry,
Yeah,
I lost it, like laughing like a child. I was like, well, I don't think he's still in his 20s and 30s, Tim.
No. Yeah.
My stupid brain. But
Yeah.
Anywho, if depression is something that you feel is prevalent in your life, you may want to look at your diet. Are you accidentally taking too much antidepressants? Are you doing the fast food on the way home? Because we know that's cooked with no love, right? And making those kind of trade-offs. It almost goes back into the spring cleaning episode where we talked about making those trade-offs, right? And then you're making the decision to hit the drive-thru on the way home, even though you know, like, hey, it's going to raise your cortisol, it's going to raise your cholesterol, it's going to do all of these things. But that's still the decision because, yeah, you're making that trade-off because you're exhausted at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one thing, I guess, if you're in a place like Portland, Oregon, that does have plenty of restaurant options available that do offer more healthier things. Not like my hometown of Grand Rapids. It's like, do you want meat here or do you want meat here?
Texas, like, vegan. We got a salad. I don't think you can have the croutons, though. No ranch dressing for you, I take it.
Only half of it's bacon.
Bacon bits is vegan, right? Actually, they are. But the bacon bits, if you ever look at the side of like the cheap ass McCormick bacon bits, they're TVP. That's just really salty. It's not bacon, guys. So if I just blew anybody's mind, I learned that because it was on the I can't believe it's vegan page on PETA's website for a while with the
boy.
bacon bits. Yeah, not healthy, but it's there. So yeah, like, just be open to looking at your diet. I understand, like, the way that our little human brains, our human animal brains are kind of programmed is that by age 5, you're really set into what you're going to eat, which is actually another thing Kimberly talked about in the podcast I listened to. And it makes sense, right? Because those mirror neurons, it's the generation above that normally teaches the generation below what's poisonous, what's good, what's bad, what'll make you sick. So yeah, by age 5, you're normally really glammed on. So you're not, like, there's nothing wrong with you if you have a hard time changing your palate. It takes work because evolutionary, the animal part of us, really depended on that to live and not accidentally eat poison. Like, it depended on generational knowledge. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to fight some of that reparenting almost in your brain.
And yeah, I mean, you really do have to work hard against it, which is something I find myself struggling with in terms of food. Now, my food intake now is much better than it used to be, but it can definitely be better. And I think the big thing that's been holding me back is just finding the right things that I know I can cook that are still have some health options to them. But don't, I'm never going to be a Gordon Ramsay. I don't really care about cooking. I just want something quick, I guess, and you can still get that. Even if it's something like making a box of macaroni and cheese and then popping in some frozen broccoli into it.
Just to add something to it. Another thing, like, when I was very much starting to play with this concept of food and I didn't have that energy to be cooking, or I didn't have the ability, I looked up and I wound up getting onto Soylent. Because it wasn't meant to gain weight, lose weight, because that's what I was struggling with. I didn't want to gain or lose. I just wanted food units. So I didn't have to have the decision fatigue of it. So actually, the Mr. Reverend and I talked very recently to cut budget and to take away the fucking decision fatigue about it and to set us up for success. We're actually going to just start doing overnight oats in the refrigerator and have a shake for lunch. and then a piece of fruit later. And then that way we're only having to cook like maybe every other day, because the two of us, you make a meal, normally it serves 4. So you can have leftovers. Like there's ways that you can try to set it up for success, and make it a little bit easier. And even if it's starting with like a bag of frozen broccoli and like a chicken breast for dinner, because hey, guess what? If you're having overnight oats and a shake, those are 2 meals you have successfully taken factory meat out of, if you follow this kind of theory that I've started to follow, that matters. So then maybe that grilled chicken breast and one of the bag-o salads isn't necessarily the worst decision at night. Because if the worst thing you're having is the salad dressing on the salad and any trace amounts of cortisol or whatever that might be in that one chicken breast, that's totally reasonable. And that is something I used to do with my ex-fiance, is that we would get a whole thing of the Tyson frozen chicken breasts, and I would bring them down and like we had all the marinades that we bought, because, you know, all the marinades down that aisle. I would put the tablespoons and it would thaw in the fridge during the day. I'd come home, I'd have a family sized bag of salad, rip it up, serve it between the two of us. And then that chicken breast just went with 0 love on a George Foreman grill. So, but that worked for us. And that's definitely better than necessarily a box O stovetop hamburger helper, right? With especially no veggies added, because a lot of people will just make the one thing. So just don't be afraid to challenge your eating habits, and understand it is going to take work, especially if you have gotten your palate so adjusted to what you've been eating for X number of years or decades in some case. I was raised on chicken nuggets and Kraft macaroni and cheese. Yes, I managed to detox from it. However, I will say Kraft mac and cheese is still my comfort food. If I'm like sick and cannot make myself eat, I know I will eat Kraft mac and cheese. So see, that even goes to show how strong that is, right? Because even though I don't eat it anymore, that's still the one thing I know I will eat. Kraft mac and cheese, no matter how sick I am. And plain cheese pizza. Those 2 things.
Me, potato salad. And
potato salad?
Yeah, I mean, because my mother used to make potato salad back in the day. Now, granted, the stuff I buy from the store tastes nothing like hers, because the stuff I buy from the store has seasoning in it, but I still eat it.
Exactly. And so I want to get into the last one so that we don't make this too long of an episode. But the other part that I feel is super important for me is exercise. And on There Is Life After Trauma, just this week, like 2 days ago from us recording today, I had made this kind of inspired by how the Mr. Reverend and I have started running more recently and how much better I've been feeling because of that. I made 5 benefits of running daily. Now, I do want to underline here, it doesn't necessarily have to be running. Like when you really look into it, it's any cardio. But for me, running is a cool one. Normally, even if you save up and get an intro level pair of shoes, granted, I invest in mine because I've got ankle problems that I don't want to make worse. And I'm doing a lot of pavement running, which can really be hard on your ankles and knees. But running is one of the more inexpensive things you can get into. You don't necessarily have to have a gym. And if you do have a gym, there's treadmill that you can use that and try to get there. So my thing is it is a good explosive. Running is one of the more efficient ways for a cortisol dump. I will say that was something that I found to be consistently true. But anywho, here's just kind of the wave tops of the little shareable that I had made, that there's a new study that found only 10 minutes of moderate intensity running improves mood and benefits executive function. Researchers suggest that running may provide more mental health benefits than other types of exercise. And ways that it does that is it tends to stimulate endorphin and endocannabinoid production, because you can produce cannabinoids in your brain without actually having to inhale it, which is also what they call the running high, but it does promote relaxation and positive mood in general. Increase blood flow to the brain, and that's been shown to help improve mood regulation, which we all know how important that is if you've ever been in front of somebody who's road raging. It also improves executive function, and for those that don't know what that entails, that is working memory, flexible thinking, and self-control. So that goes back into some of the mood regulation stuff. It also reduces levels of the body's stress hormone, adrenaline, and cortisol, which can trigger underlying issues like anxiety and depression. So if you do have those illnesses, taking up a habit of just jogging 10 minutes, that's it. That's not even doing it, oh, I need to get a mile in 10 minutes. No, it's literally you run your best for 10 minutes, whatever that looks like. I don't do a 10-minute mile right now. I had kind of gotten up to that at one point, but then I took the winter off, so my cardio is shit. But I went and did a 10-minute mile this afternoon. And for anybody who's curious, I pulled those facts from Nike.com, verywellmind.com, and a Harvard health study that they had. And those are the kind of, like, I included all of the links when I shared this. Like I said, I do try to make sure I'm not BSing people. So yeah, there's just a lot out there that says, like, even doing jumping jacks or just something for 10 minutes, if you can't go out and do a run, you can get started somewhere with your body. And even if that's just going for a walk until you can get that down, it goes back to go pet some dogs, go walk the park. Maybe you can lean out and even get a dog friend that helps encourage you to get out and go on a brisk walk is even better than nothing.
Or another option to think of, too, that may seem out of left field is YouTube. Why would I say that? Think about all of the channels that are devoted to, like, exercise in the home or yoga. There are plenty of, like, yoga channels you can watch for free and get an entire workout.
My favorite one, sorry, I'm dying, because it mixes, if you love dogs and you're interested in somebody who does yoga, it's Yoga with Adrian, and her dog is very often, like, there with her. It's very sweet. Like, sometimes he'll lean up against her leg or something when she's doing poses, but she's very good. She's also got some for injury, because she has her own personal practice. So this is just stuff she puts out there out of the goodness of doing it. It's like how a lot of coaches and psychologists will have, podcasts now to talk about things, because they do want people to have tools. They don't necessarily want this market system that America seems to think is so fucking necessary to make people want to help each other. Like, there are a lot of helper souls out there. A Yoga with Adrian, super recommend that one if you're looking for a good YouTube yogi. She's great.
Indeed. Now, you said that Mr. Reverend also had a recommendation too.
He did. He knew that we were going to be talking about depression and things and, like, kind of ways to help. And he knew I was going for an exercise angle. So he shared that climbing.com actually has an article with links to more articles. And I'm just going to read kind of their little blurb about it, but we'll share it because this is just more of encouraged reading, guys. Depression, addiction, bipolar disorder, PTSD, eating disorders, severe grief. Climbers as humans can experience any and all of these things. To honor Mental Health Awareness Month, we've de-paywalled some of our best stories on these subjects. Stories about icons whose fame pushed them towards isolation, depression, and alcoholism. Stories about young crushers whose drive to get strong saw them eating so little that it negatively impacted not just their climbing, but their health. And stories about guilt and grief and the spiral of self-hatred and abuse that these emotions can lead to. And stories about drug and alcohol abuse that has all too often ransacked the lives of beloved members of our community. Now, that being said, you can also find any number of articles that talks about, and in there too, about how people used climbing, like rock climbing specifically, to work through issues, to work through depression, to give them something to focus on. Actually, I'm a rock climber myself. And part of what I love about it is the zen that is required to do it, because it is a full body and mind experience, because you're needing to focus and look and be calm, but you also need to be aware of your body's balance and where you are. And you do need to be physically strong enough to make certain moves. Granted, most of it's in your legs as you start to learn. If you ever go rock climbing, you're not really doing pull-ups that whole time. That'd be fucking nuts. This is more like it's just kind of keeping your balance up here. But I did find it was interesting that they wanted to kind of warn the almost getting too into the physical exercise part of it too. So I did really respect what they pulled together for that. But I think basically the overall message here is, if you are at a point in your life where you're not okay and you're struggling with that, the important thing is to do something, right? Like, you can use pretty much any physical activity for sure. Like, you could find people who got into rowing who got into rock climbing, running. Oh my God, there's like so many stories of people who have used running to fight depression. Like it's so out there that that's probably the most common one. And I think it even goes into like some of those studies are finding that it does tend to be very effective for some reason. And I think it has to do with that whole thing with the runner's high, that elusive runner's high, because it just seems to do something to you, right? And even then, maybe it's just sparking that we are natural runners. It goes back to how we used to hunt food. Because almost in my head, like if you want to go back and try to figure out how much we've been programmed as a civilized society, look at tribes who don't live in civilized society. Look at the Tarahumara. They still are barefoot fucking runners out of Africa. Like that's still what they do. They still kind of recruit them and end up trying to put them in the Olympics because they run fast. Like that's so there's a lot to be said about things that you can do physically that you can get into. And plus it also gives you that social element because you're meeting other people who are into it. So really getting into a physical hobby is the biggest takeaway. And running is, for today, I ran this Shamrock Run back in 2019, and it was the first race I ever ran. I was convinced that I would never run races, that my asthma was too bad, that I would always walk them because I had done them before, but I always did them like, I can walk this, right? Like I don't have to like actually move quick. And then I don't know, I just got this bug to defy that. And I love it. I still love that I did that thing, and it felt so fucking empowering to run. And I didn't even run a 5K. I jumped for an 8K. And then I continued running 5Ks, and you make like daytime friends for the day, and people cheer you on. Oh my God, the people that are there for someone specific will cheer you on around a hard corner if you look like you're exhausted. Like, because especially with asthma, like I wasn't looking cute or anything when I was running up to some of those water stations. I was like, like we used to make jokes. So, the Mr. Reverend was in the military. And so, they have chants and stuff. And every now and then there's this one that he would do. It's like, what's the sound of a devil dog? Huh, huh. And, my version of that, he'd try to say it to me and I'd go, So that being said, I was still very much in the wheezy phase. So it was really cool to have people like cheer you on. So even though like running doesn't sound like one of those social things, it can be. And then what's neat is a lot of those 5Ks are charities. So you're actually giving to a good cause. When you do pay the $25, you get a t-shirt forever that reminds you. Like it's so interesting how you can use stuff like that to kind of trick your brain into finding something even more pleasurable than the action itself. And a lot of that's going to come with social interactions. It goes back to us being pack animals. Most of us really do like being around people when it comes down to it, to some level, even if it's just temporary 5-minute friend.
And that's, I think, the important takeaway here, because you do have friends. You do have family, whether that be biological family or people that have become your family over time. The important thing here is that, we all deal with this in some way, shape, or form, some more so than others. But the important thing is to rely upon the people in your life, because if you are able to communicate that, hey, I'm not feeling that good right now, you have friends that can help you, that can support you. Hopefully they won't annoy you, but, it will impel you to get up and move. And ultimately, that's for depression the ultimate solution to everything. Because if you're lying in your bed all day, ruminating on everything bad going on in your life, you're not helping yourself. If you're listening to sad songs to keep crying and just to think about the sad thing, you're not helping yourself. If you're going to Wendy's and ordering too many triple burgers, you're not helping yourself. Get up, get out, and find ways to interact with other human beings, yes, because that will help your mental health probably more than anything else we've talked about.
Oh, yeah. And also just having an attitude of curiosity about your depression or your mental health or your mental illness, because you can even go and try to figure out, Google Google is an amazing tool. Just, try to vet the results a little bit. But, you can even find those things that might be contributing against your mental health. Like, hey, go look up some of the stuff about social media and mental health. Turns out it can be really bad for you. However, things that can be really good for you are things like crafts and stuff, right? So doing handcrafts can be very meditative, similar to gardening. Crocheting has been shown to be really good for mental health. And so you can actually kind of tap into some of the good things about social media. Because yes, we do have serotonin reaction when somebody likes or hearts something that we do. So you can totally do the handcraft that also has mental health benefits. You can post that handcraft and then you can still get the likes and stuff. So see, it's not necessarily to not do it. Maybe change what you're doing with it. Like you could totally have a curious mindset about this. I mean, that's really why I'm still on social media. Like I post about my stupid runs. And I love it when people like that I go on a run. Like half of them don't have any goddamn reason to give a shit that I went on a run today, especially on Instagram. But I like that people cheer each other on in those senses. So there are ways to even tap into the things that are bad for you and be curious about them, think about them for a minute, and maybe you can actually reframe them to be working in your favor. It all goes into building that tool belt. It's something that we had talked about on, I think, a little bit more on the suicide episode, because I talked about my therapy and when I started getting help. But you get to build your tool belt, whatever that looks like. Mine looks like when I'm driving in the car, I'm listening to lo-fi. Mine looks like when I'm listening to music and I just want to listen to music. It's from a very carefully selected list that I know what the message are, because I need that. Not everybody does. You get to pick what works for you. And I think that was what is so empowering about the self-healing movement and mental health, and picking up on what you can do for mental hygiene for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, physically, not everybody's able to go out and run. But there are other physical activities that you can do that will, hopefully build up that tolerance to where maybe some point in the future you could, even if you can't, just like the old people exercises, like they'll have exercise videos of like 80-year-olds in chairs and then like lift yourself up, lift yourself down. Something as simple as that is still putting out physical activity. So do what works best for you. And most importantly, again, don't disregard, your support system, because everybody has it and everybody does have a support system. Even if you think your friends, even if you think they would be better off without you, that's not true. Not true at all. Utilize
Definitely not true. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I think that will be a good spot to wrap it up here, unless you had any other thoughts.
Oh, no. I mean, I could. Unfortunately, this is something I could talk ages about, mental hygiene and stuff like that. But I'm going to leave it at here today, because I don't think this needs to be a crazy long episode just for the sake of our listeners. But if you are interested in some of those things, some of the when I research stuff, sometimes that's what turns into a shareable, because that's kind of my craft. That is something I do that is good. It's a lot like doing a handcraft or crochet. So if you want to follow along any of that, if you're interested in more ways that at least I have found and things that I research and start to fold in, my Instagram tag is @ThereIsLifeAfterTrauma. So that's where I focus on that a little bit more in my life, guys. So if you're curious for more, want to continue this conversation with me, you can go there. If you want to continue the conversation with both of us, we invite you guys to Facebook for now. That's still kind of primarily where we seem to interact with folks. But yeah, this conversation could go on ages. So I think we're good here.
Oh yeah, and we are definitely going to be talking about this again. I mean, it's something that it's definitely affected both of our lives in terms of depression and mental health and all that stuff. And it's going to be something we will talk about again at some point, I am sure.
Oh, exactly.
All right. So with that, I think we will wrap it up. We thank you all for listening to Friends Talking Nerdy once again. Remember to check the other shows on the Friends Talking Nerdy podcast network, including Excelsior Journeys with George Soroy. Still glad that we have him on board here. And remember, every Saturday we'll have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Time for me to get some chicken wang wangs.
Yeehaw.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes. the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.